Hi, everyone. Welcome to Food Talk Live. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. It really means a lot to me. I'm really excited because I have two guests who are experts around finding better ways, better and more nourishing ways to feed school kids in the United States before, obviously, during, and after COVID-19. Let me just give you some sort of background on the situation of school meal programs right now, and child hunger in the United States. According to the Brookings Institution, a survey of mothers with young children found that nearly a fifth are not getting enough to eat. Nearly a fifth of the children in the United States are not getting enough to eat. And despite heroic efforts by school districts and cafeteria staff, nonprofits, and restaurants to continue to provide meals to kids after schools closed as a result of the pandemic, the meals are only reaching between 11 to 36% of those in need, according to researchers at Barnard College and Duke University. So there's a real danger that kids will continue to go hungry as unemployment rates soar, as the pandemic continues and quarantine and lockdowns continue. The summertime is upon us. That's a time when typically kids who depend on meals for not only lunches, but also breakfast and other meals have higher rates of hunger in the United States. And that's been something that nonprofits like Feeding America and No Kid Hungry have stepped in to address in the past. But what really concerns, I know our guest and myself as well, is that this year there will be a greater need than ever before, again, with so many people out of jobs. So our guests today are, one of them is a really, really good friend to Food Tank, and the other is somebody I'm just so excited to talk to you. Devon Klatell is the Managing Director of the Food Initiative for the Rockefeller Foundation, and Dr. Katie Wilson serves as the Executive Director of the Urban Food Alliance. And they are going to talk about the challenges they're seeing on the ground to feed hungry kids and their families, and what can be done to make sure that kids are really well nourished and healthy during the pandemic. Thank you both so much for being here. I know it's such a busy time and you're both doing such important work.
Well, thanks so much for having us, Danny. And it's always great to chat with you and be a part of these food tank conversations, which I know have a new urgency given the crises that we're going through at the moment. So thank you for having us both.
Yes, really appreciate that you take this topic on. Thank you.
Oh no, I'm excited to learn a lot. This is not something that I, have a strong background in. It's something I try to follow. So I'm excited to learn from you both. And Katie, I'm hoping that you can start and then Devon can jump in. Can you give us just sort of an overview of what schools and school districts and kids are facing right now? The stats that I shared earlier are really shocking to me. And I'm sure there's a lot more statistics that are even worse than I don't know about.
Yeah, I think that it's really a grim picture. On any given day, 30 to 33 million children would go through their school cafeterias and receive school meals. And about 22 million of those children would be from families that qualify for meal benefits. So they're living in poverty or below the poverty line. So when COVID-19 happened, of course, schools closed. Cafeterias do not have to be open. Schools do not have to be serving food, but they chose to, so that because they believe so much in their communities and that they're a center of the part of that community. So, but what happened is they had to change their distribution model very quickly, literally within a day or so, to go curbside, grab and go. And then originally we started with serving people every day. They would come and get their food and go. And then, of course, as the virus we learned more and more about the virus and the contagiousness of that virus, we needed to limit contact time. So districts continue to evolve. And now the best practice we've seen so far is giving people a week's worth of food at a time. Right. We're working on a per meal reimbursement program that is the normal school lunch program. And so if you can think about that, it's very bureaucratic and it's very labored with a lot of intense work, a lot of packaging, a lot of identification of meals, things like that. So not really set up to be long-term emergency community type feeding, but they're doing the best they can. The other thing that happened is that even adults, as this pandemic escalated, adults started to come as well and say, please, we need food as well. Can we also get food? So districts have decided to step in and feed their community, even though there isn't a stream for funding for adult meals in the child nutrition program normally. So just a lot of challenges and but heroic work going on where people are putting their own health at risk to make sure that these communities get food. And then the idea of how many sites. If you have hundreds of schools and you go
Right.
down to 30 or 40 sites, Dallas, Texas alone, 650,000 meals
Oh my gosh.
in one day because they're doing it weekly, but out of only a few sites. And so the numbers are just astronomical.
Absolutely. Devon, I'm hoping you can jump in because this is such a huge undertaking for schools and the nonprofits that are trying to help them. How can sort of the philanthropic community, take this on and help them as well?
Yeah, and I would just underscore, the statistics and the sort of dire need out there that Katie is speaking to. I think the hard truth is that many of us at the beginning of this crisis thought that, took some solace in the fact that kids would be largely spared perhaps from the effects of the sort of health effects of COVID. And I think what we're seeing now is, unfortunately, tragically, that's not the case. I think we now have millions and millions of kids who are going to be facing a nutrition security crisis now and for some time to come. I think the role of philanthropy in a case like this was to really try to step in and support both the nonprofit and the frontline folks that Katie's describing that worked so quickly to try to innovate and stand up these new models. I mean, in some districts, it was literally 48 hours between when a school was closed and when a new model was stood up to provide food to the communities in really innovative ways. And it was both at personal risk and financial risk for some of the districts, taking on a number of costs that they weren't certain would be reimbursed by federal funds or by other funds. And so part of what we and other philanthropic partners have tried to do is to provide some resource for those folks to move quickly and act quickly and continue to get meals out. I think what philanthropy can't do is support the scale of this program for the long term.
Right.
And that's where we're really looking for the federal government and other levels of government to come in and to, continue to provide some of the flexibilities that they've been providing to districts and schools to keep these programs running, and to make sure that the program is funded not just now, but in the next school year and the school year after that, as needed. The other thing I would say is that we're trying to do just from a philanthropic and frankly community standpoint is make sure that these nonprofits and schools feel supported. I think lots of the parts of the food system are getting attention now, Danny, as you well know, and that's great. And we want to make sure that these school staff and superintendents and others who are working really hard know that we see them and we're supporting them. Food banks and others play a critical role, but so do these school systems in lots of communities. And so that's part of what we're trying to use our voice to do as well.
Yeah, they are really unsung heroes. I mean, we hear about frontline workers and, the essential workers, and those folks are certainly important, but these principals and teachers and bus drivers, I talked to the Chef Ann Foundation at the very beginning of the pandemic, and they were already scrambling and collecting, ways to help school districts across the country, find ways to manage this. And they've all, sort of evolved over the last, 2 months or 75 days. I've lost count and it's just, it is really inspiring, but I also suspect that there's some fatigue, right? This is trying to do this every day when it's so important. And there are so many kids and parents and families in need. There has to be a lot of, toll on mental health. And I don't know if you can both speak to that sort of side of this, the toll this is taking on teachers. Yesterday on my street, I was watching, it's gonna make me cry. I was watching teachers, deliver the 8th grade diplomas to kids on my street, and, giving them backpacks and presents and stuff, and giving them balloons. And it's just, I think teachers are really struggling right now. And I'm sure principals and, lunch ladies and lunch gentlemen, they want to be helpful, but this has to be taking a toll on them right now.
Yeah, I can weigh in on that. We have a weekly call with our members every week, and Most definitely. Fatigue is huge. And part of it is just the uncertainty. What will continue? How will it continue? Will the waivers continue? What do we do next? How do we start school in the fall? And when you talk to a number of the people that are right on the front line, because they don't have to be there, employees are being paid by the district. These employees that are working are choosing to come. And so they've been asked many times, why are you here? And they will go in tears and say, well, where else where will my children get food? And they talk about my children collectively. These are their children. And so, but the fatigue is setting in. It's exhausting. They're worried about themselves and their own well-being. And then we do worry about where are all the children that aren't coming. So we have put food on school buses and taken it everywhere. Los Angeles, New York, they all have large numbers of children that are homeless. Where are those children? And so we've really also did a distribution on the road and in buses. Again, going back to Dallas, they partnered with the city bus system just to get food to as many people as possible, because we know they can't get to these sites. And so that in itself, not only the work alone, but just the worry about where are these kids that they know need food. So
yeah. Devon, do you want to weigh in on that as well, the toll it's taking? I mean, I know this is an issue very close to your heart, for example. And so, I mean, it's not just the toll on districts, it's the toll on leaders and the food system, like both of you, who are sort of struggling. Like, how do we help, organizations figure this out?
Yeah, and as Katie said, part of it is the uncertainty. I think part of it is, unfortunately, one thing that in my mind is certain is that this is not a short-term problem. I think as you know, and lots of folks know, once we get to a place where families are food insecure and kids are going hungry, that's usually a pretty long-term road back to nutrition security. So I think there is some fatigue. What I would say is, from my perspective, this is really a moment for yes and. What I don't think we have time for is a lot of discussion around one kind of support being better than another kind of support. I think in the moment we need every tool in the toolbox to support kids and families. School meals are a critical part of what I call the nutrition security frontline. Food banks are a critical part. Federal programs are a critical part. All these pieces right now really need to come together, and I think that will help. And I think one of the really positive things that we've seen out of this crisis is new partnerships being forged. I think, Katie, I'm sure can speak to examples, but we're seeing food banks and school districts work together in ways that they might not have before. We've seen distributors and farmers and others connecting directly with some of these distribution points, and in some cases, families themselves, in ways that we haven't before. And I think that is making people feel, those doing this work hopefully feel a little bit more supported, and like, there's a team behind each one of these really critical roles. So I think that's one thing we can do to help is now's not the time to sort of talk about, well, we could do this or we could do this. It's like, for the next couple of months, it's a full press, everything we can do. And as you know, Danny, I heard your conversation last week, I think it was, with Dari and others who are also saying that quality nutrition right now is really important for these families from a health perspective. And so making sure that we're providing the resources to keep quality a part of the conversation, and the support we're providing to communities is really important from our perspective too.
Right, and that, you heard me talk to Dr. Mazafarian about that. That we don't want to lose all the strides that we've made in nutrient density and providing more fresh produce in school lunches. And I feel like in some ways there's a tendency to go backwards here, because we're sort of rushing in this emergency to just provide food. And you're right, like some of this food is not maybe always going to be the most healthful food or that kind of thing, but getting food to families right now is important, and then figuring out later how to make it more nutritious, I am sure is something that you're both struggling with.
Go ahead, Devon.
Yeah, I would say, in the ideal world, we could do both. I think right now in a crisis situation, the priority for most communities is making sure that there is food flowing. But one of the reasons that I will say we're so focused on making sure schools financially are made whole coming out of this crisis from a nutrition program perspective is that we don't want them to be sacrificing the budget they might need to provide quality, healthy food next year or the school year after that because they're digging themselves out of a financial hole, given the extraordinary efforts they've gone through this spring and summer. So we do want to make sure that as we look to the sort of medium and long term, that schools and other sort of emergency programs continue to have the budget and the resources they have to provide that quality food. And as you know, there's been some innovation, I think, real-time innovation in terms of trying to get produce and healthy foods from farms that would otherwise serve other parts of the food service sector to some of these communities and families. I think, Katie can speak to this. There's been some really great things about some of those programs and some bumps in the road in terms of implementation and challenges in adapting to that model. But I am heartened that is a part of the conversation. I think that I continue to hear.
That's great. Katie, do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Sure, I can, and actually the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has been really active in this as well, just trying to keep that in the forefront too. And so I know the partnerships, like Devon talked about, some of these new partnerships with food banks that farmers and to families, those boxes are mostly fresh food, which is really good. Because the school districts have such strong farm to school partnerships, they're really trying to look at, because this has become so long-term now, to try to rekindle some of those and say, okay, what is available and how can we use it? I will also say that United Fresh their organization's been very active, making sure that we have access to the kinds of foods we need. We just heard from Los Angeles that they did some really good work with them to try to make sure that a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables were going through into those programs and into those meals. It is hard when you're packing to go and it's a grab and go. But I think that those partnerships are forming and that people are trying to figure out how to help the farmer keep the community strong in the farming community, as well as getting this food to families. So it's been helpful.
That's really is encouraging. And that's one of the things, we talk about the silver linings during this very uncertain time, and having those collaborations and those partnerships formed that I think will last long after COVID. I think local and regional procurement, that's something that should always be part of the conversation when we're talking about school meal programs. So I hope that, again, that's not something we lose, 18 months from now when we're on the other side of this, but, keeping those farmers in the loop and having them as a source where they're, and they can count on it even more than restaurants. They can count on being able to sell to schools, at least 9 months of the year. That's a really amazing thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I could just build on that, Danny, I think, zooming out even from schools for just a second, looking at the sort of depth of the nutrition security crisis that we have in this country, I think we're going to need massive resource mobilization against that problem. I think there'll be a lot of public funds going to that. I think there'll be policy discussions and other kinds of discussions, public-private partnerships. And I just think we all need to think about how to make those resources work harder for not just to address the near-term crisis, but build the food system we want. And I know this is something Katie and I and some of our other grantees were working on even pre-COVID, was how do you take the public money that's going into school nutrition programs, that's going to other places, and make sure that it's also supporting, local economies and farmers of all sizes, that it's also supporting nourishing food in the supply chain, that's also supporting, environmental sustainability. We're not going to have the resources to be able to have public dollars just do one thing in our food system right now, right? We're going to need them to address the crisis and to work hard on all those other issues. And I think that that's something that's very much on the minds of a lot of folks that are in this conversation, and something we should think about in school meals, but with other programs as well as we go through the months ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really positive thing, though. I mean, I know it's a struggle during this time, but yes, thinking about how to use public dollars more efficiently and more, in support of farmers, especially, but creating this local and regional economy that really works, that can withstand these global shocks, whatever they are, whether they're from climate change or another pandemic or something else. I think that's so important, and I don't want to make light of this tragedy, but that's something I'm really excited about. Hearing these kinds of stories of how different groups are collaborating, groups that would have never come together before, or, not even spoken to one another, are now, building all of this, really incredible web of organizations and institutions that can solve this crisis and many others.
Mm-hmm. I think oops, go ahead, Devon.
No, please.
I think that's really critical. I think we have seen where the food system has broken down, and I think that we are going to value those relationships even more now as we move forward, because there is a disruption in the food distribution. There's no doubt about it, and so and again, our districts are that's one of our stepping stones and our goals for the Urban School Food Alliance is to continue to increase local procurement and local relationships with food distribution. And so to re-strengthen those and to make those bonds even stronger and expand those bonds is really what we're going to look at in the future.
Yeah, it's great. I do want to look a little bit ahead to the future now. And I know things are uncertain and no one knows what if or when schools will open in the fall. How are you sort of preparing now, because there is no rest, right? You don't get the summer off to sort of reflect on this and figure out how to do it. What are your plans for, the fall? And if students are able to go back to school sort of at even on a limited basis, what kinds of things are you thinking about?
Well, some of the things we're hearing, again, it's so up in the air. No one really knows. A lot of districts don't have the plans really, really concreted yet. But that's, again, why we really need the waivers that we already have to be extended so that we have some ability to make decisions and move forward. The most we're hearing right now is kids coming every other day and then every other Friday. So Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday, and every other Friday. So we're really concerned. We want to be able to serve and send food home with those kids for the days they're not in school. We're hearing a lot about high school potentially being all just virtual. So the sites that we have now, we have to continue, or else we have to develop something so that those students can also access food. So the hard part is the unknown, and that's why we really are trying to at least secure these waivers so that we at least know how to start planning for some of this and can be a part of that conversation. Go ahead.
Well, let's get into that, right? The waivers need to be extended. You're unsure, the school districts are unsure. What do you want the federal government to do sort of specifically? Because I know that this political climate we're in is very turbulent. And, it must be a struggle to sort of figure out how to navigate it. So in an ideal world, what does the federal government need to do to help solve this problem?
Well, we've always seen school nutrition as a bipartisan issue. I mean, feeding children is what we all need to do. We have an obligation to do it. So what we're really looking for, and we've been talking with Devon and the team at Rockefeller and other organizations as well, is that universal free meals for the year 2021 school year. It is absolutely imperative. We must do this. We can do this. There are so many families in crisis. There are so many families that don't even know how to apply for free or reduced or benefits or whatever. If we have alternate feeding days, if they want us to feed in classrooms, there's no way school districts can do the point of sale that we're required to do, identifying students and their incomes and all that stuff. So it's imperative that at least for the first year, what a relief to families and what an economic stimulus. Let us put our money back into buying local produce rather than trying to figure out which kid is in which classroom and eating or not eating. But universal meals is absolutely true. And then the other thing we've really asked for, and it's in the HEROES Act right now, is to begin to make these school nutrition programs whole again, to refer to what Devon said, is that we don't want to see them start cutting back on all the work that's been done. Right. Because they have to cut their budgets 20 to 25% for next year. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, we can't go backwards. I've said it before, but we just can't. I mean, so much progress has been made. Devon, from your perspective, so Rockefeller is doing amazing work. You're supporting Katie's work. You're supporting the World Central Kitchen. You're trying to do all these amazing things. But as you said before, philanthropy can't be responsible for everything. And so I'm sort of, asking you the same question. Ideally, what should the government be doing right now? I'm sure you agree with Katie on what she said, but what other things should they be focusing on?
I think, as Katie said, one of the really critical immediate steps is to extend waivers that have not yet been extended by USDA, including community eligibility. One thing that I didn't appreciate until I worked closely with Katie and folks in the school world, including, Food Corps and other partners, is the tremendous complex operational and kind of administrative complexity that goes along with school meals. I mean, I think we all hear about the budget constraints, which are very real, and the time constraints, which are very real, but the administrative task of ordering food, of seeing which families are eligible, of planning and forecasting, and all that has just been, massively made more complex by both the crisis and the questions that you're asking about next year. So I think anything we can do to help to simplify the lives of schools and make sure they're well positioned for the years to come, again, not to cut what we know is critical programming, whether that's buying healthy food or other food-related programming in schools, I think that's going to be really critical. And then I would say more broadly, at Rockefeller, we're thinking about how do we make the most of this moment, which, as you said, Danny, I think there is a silver lining here, for lack of a better word. How do we make the most of this moment to learn about what all these regulatory changes and innovations have, what impact have they had on the families and kids that we are most trying to serve? What can we learn from that in terms of how we might rethink some of our regulations and policies going forward? How can we take the massive wave of investment I think is coming, and again, to promote those long-term goals around equity, which is implicit in this conversation, but we should probably explicitly call out, around equity, environmental sustainability, and health, and really see this as sort of a new phase of food policy in the U.S. And I think there's an openness to change and an open ear from stakeholders and partners and the public on the food system that we might not have had in February. And I think that's a really important thing for us to lean into as well. So, we're starting to, inclusive of the school work, but beyond it, to think about what are some of those longer term changes and how can we work with a wide variety of folks to set some goals and put some things in motion there.
Absolutely. I've been really encouraged to see how people, regular folks who really weren't thinking about food and agriculture before this are now thinking about it, because they saw, the, news reports of milk being dumped or potatoes sort of being, buried, that kind of thing, or they saw empty grocery store shelves. And so people are thinking about food in a much different way. I mean, mostly because they were first, sort of panicked about it. But now I think, because it's sort of on everybody's minds, and they're cooking more at home, or they're, ordering meals, that kind of thing, that there is a real chance for the food and agriculture sector and the food and agriculture movement to really make some headway post-crisis. And that's exciting to me. I want to get into that environmental sustainability angle. By necessity, a lot of the meals that are being prepared and distributed to students and their families are packaged, and there's a lot of, I imagine, product waste. There's more plastic involved. There's that kind of thing. Is that one of the things you're sort of struggling with as you try to figure out how to get these meals to students who need them the most?
Yeah, packaging has become a real issue. It's things, of course, we would never use. And the Urban School Food Alliance, we actually work at doing compostable packaging whenever we can with what is being used in the cafeterias. So now, of course, it's we've changed to a completely different distribution. So everything is packaged. It has helped to go down to once a week distribution, though. Mm-hmm. And then what they've done is they've put more things in bulk, and then developed a little card or a QR code that they can scan, and then it tells you what the portion size is, what the meal components are, and then how to prepare them. So that's helped with some of the packaging. But still, I mean, one of our calls was centered only on what box can we come up with, and where do we purchase the box to put all this in. So it is, we are very concerned about it. And now one of the big issues is water. We're supposed to, if school starts in the fall, part of the regulation is that you have to have potable water on the line with every meal. How are we going to get water to people? Even if kids are in school, they can't use water fountains. They can't use dispensers that they all touch. And I know we've had some outside people suggest bottled water. We all just about passed out cold. That got suggested because can you imagine the District of New York or LA buying bottled water and all of these bottles and there's just no, I mean, it's just not feasible. So those are the kinds of things we have to really think about that a lot of people won't even it doesn't dawn on them that we're supposed to have this water available. And
Right.
water fountains are being shut down right now. They're not going to let kids use them. So how is that going to be done? We really need to sit down with some folks from the federal government and say, how can this work for next year? Like Devon said, and make it easier for schools all the way around and for families. So
Absolutely.
it's going to have a huge impact on the environment and in landfills with all this product. So
absolutely. I mean, we're already seeing it with, so much food being delivered, whether it's, takeaway from restaurants or Instacart. There's so much extra packaging going on, and we're all guilty of it because we're all scared, and there is, but you're right, a discussion needs to be had, and that's where government, has a real place and should be taking that on and coming up with solutions.
I think a really good example is too, as CDC guidelines are to feed in the classroom. Well, we've been having a lot of robust discussions with our members. It would be much better if classroom by classroom, they came into the cafeteria to get a tray of food and bring it back to their classroom. If that food has to be delivered into the classroom and portion size and meal components have to be identified by a teacher or someone that's not trained, that's going to mean all individual packaging again. So these are the kinds of things we have to think about.
Absolutely. So I want to get back to some of you were talking about the delivery once a week to students and their families, and it sounds more like a meal kit kind of box rather than sort of, food that's already prepared. And I'm wondering how you're using that as an opportunity, not only for parents to learn sort of better eating habits, but for kids to learn how to cook. Is that part of the equation right now, or is that something that you're planning to do later because, you're just trying to get the food to folks right now?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I think that there is quite a bit of ready to eat food as well, like sandwiches and salads and things like that, because we are very conscious that there are a lot of families that don't have the ability to cook for whatever their living situation is. So it's a little bit of both, but they are giving instructions. They are asking people to go to their website and see how to prepare some of this food. Of course, we have to keep it very simplistic, again, because we don't know what people's ability to cook is. So, it just depends what's in the freezer, what they have available, and what they think people would be willing to do. So.
No, and I'm glad that you both brought up this point around equity, and I think this is a sort of a point that often bothers me when we tell people to eat healthy. We don't know what their kitchens look like, what implements they have, what sort of resources or knowledge that they have available to them. So telling them to eat healthy when they don't have access to or can afford, for example, a working refrigerator or a working stove, or, the pots and pans that, come so easily to most of us. So I'm so glad you brought up that point, because I think it's a conversation that needs to be had more. We just assume that people are not eating healthy because they don't want to, and it's because they can't. And the more we can reiterate that, I think the better. Devon, from Rockefeller's perspective, I don't imagine that this was a hard case for you to sell to the foundation, that kids need to eat well during this time. What, you're also thinking long term about a lot of other food initiatives as part of your work. What sort of worries you the most when we're not, in addition to school lunches? I mean, we've been seeing so much food waste. I know that's an issue you work closely on. What are your thoughts on the predictions that there will be more food waste than ever this year in the United States than before?
I think so. From the food waste perspective, that's another thing, Danny, that you and I have talked a lot about in the past, and we have worked on both globally. It has really come during this crisis, although it has always been there in the background. I hope that some action will be taken to make sure that this isn't a year of waste when it's also a year of great need. And I think, part is we were just talking about packaging at a school classroom level, but there's the whole distribution, transport, logistics side from sort of farm to sort of B2B. It used to be, but now it's sort of B to community center, B to, farm to distribution point. I think there's a lot that coordinated action could do to help farmers get that food off the farm,
Right.
helping to cover outpacking costs, helping to cover transportation, making sure that labor is protected and that farm labor has, the support that they need to be able to harvest that food. So I think there's a lot that can be done, and I hope that that continues to be an area of action over the next, year and beyond. I think more broadly from the Rockefeller perspective, we have for several years now really focused on how do we get equitable access to healthy and nourishing food and food that nourishes not just people but the planet. And again, I think the hopeful side of all this is that there's a real opportunity to make some headway on some key pieces of that puzzle.
Sure.
So we've talked about our schools work. I think more broadly, this work of sort of how do you use public dollars that flow not just through schools, but through, for example, the healthcare system to help support a healthy food system is an important piece of it. I do think that getting the healthcare system and other big institutions in this country that might not have thought of themselves as part of the food system to be a part of the solution is going to be really important. Schools have served food for a long time, so I consider them part of the food system, but they've become really important allies in that work as well. The other thing I would say, just building on your equity point, Danny, from a Rockefeller perspective is, food is of course one of many initiatives that we have at Rockefeller. Right now we're pushing a lot of investment and thinking and a plan around testing and the ways that can help us open the economy. I think we're trying to think hard about, as resources get into these communities, both human resources and financial resources, how can we make sure that they're addressing the needs that many families and individuals have across different parts of their lives, across different areas, right? So a lot of the families that we're talking about that have a great need when it comes to food and nutrition security are probably also facing uncertainty on the employment market, are probably also facing healthcare costs, may also be essential workers, may also be at higher risk and likely to encounter a contact tracer or tester. And so how can we make sure that those resources are working for us across the spectrum, and that we're not forcing people and families and institutions to go to 6 different programs and agencies and whatnot to get support across all these different levels. I don't know that we've cracked that yet, but I will say that it's a conversation that we're starting to have, especially as we look to the months ahead. And I think the last thing I'll say is benefits enrollment is going to be incredibly important also in the months to come. As Katie said, there are going to be millions of families and individuals that are new to a lot of these programs, that might not know how to enroll in them, that might never have needed them in the past. And so making that process as simple and streamlined as we can, I think is going to be a big piece in helping to support communities and families.
Yeah, there's absolutely no simple solution to this, right? There's no silver bullet that's going to fix all of these things at once. And one of you referred to, we need to use all the tools in the toolbox, and that is more important than ever before to have, but what I appreciate about the work that you're both doing is that the tools are there. Rockefeller knows a lot about these tools. Katie's work is all about building those tools to help urban schools. So I think it's so exciting. So I'm hoping that you can both share with me some, individuals or organizations who've inspired you over the last 2 months, who've sort of given you hope as you're both sort of struggling with how to address all of these enormous needs that are out there. Katie, do you want to go first and maybe share a story? You've been talking about school districts in Texas and New York. Are there particular folks who you want to give a shout out to?
I just really have to say, for all school nutrition employees, I just think if they're on that front line, it's easy to make fun of them. We know that there have been jokes about school meals as long as I've been in the field. And my shout out is to them. Really and truly, they don't have to be there. They've chosen to be there. Even if their district has said, we're going to feed our community, the employees have chosen to put themselves at risk. And I hope that in the end, when we come out of this, people see the real value they bring to their community every day, not just during an emergency, but every day. And I think they're the forgotten heroes in this. Certainly the medical field are heroes, but can you imagine if these school districts across the country wouldn't be serving, we're up to 1.2 million meals a day in our 12 districts. Wow. So think of all the other school districts across the country. So for me, it really is these employees that have just said, look, I'll make my own mask and I'll be there because my children, in my community need food. And those are my heroes.
That's really great. That's awesome.
Yeah, I would echo that, and I think it's the employees. I think, looking beyond the school system too, there's volunteers all across the country, that are continuing to show up at food banks and at other community distribution sites. That's a critical part of how our charitable food system works in the U.S. And I think hats off to all those folks. And then I would also just say, I think really often of a lot of the parents out there that are navigating a really hard time with kids who are home and uncertain. And, the thing that makes me emotional, Danny, is to think about the parents that have to have really hard conversations with their kids about why they don't have food in the refrigerator. And that's the part that's really heartbreaking to me. And I just think, none of us should be able to hear those stories and not want to take action to help those kids and those families. So, my hats go off to all the parents who, on top of everything else, are trying to navigate how to make sure their kids have healthy food. And I think, anything we can do to help them now and in the future should be top of our priority list.
Absolutely. Parents, school nutrition staff, they all need to be more valued, more respected, more honored. They need to probably all be paid better too. So I think that on the other side of this, I hope all of those things, are not forgotten. You can find out more information about the Rockefeller Foundation at rockefellerfoundation.org/commitment/food. And you can go to the urbanschoolfoodalliance.org for more information as well about the work that Katie's doing. We'll have both of those websites available on foodtank.com and on our social media. Thank you both so much for joining me today. I've learned so much. I'm so inspired. I think this issue is one that's sort of getting lost in all of the the clutter that's hitting the airways, especially this week. So thank you for the work that you're both doing, and thank you so much for your commitment to kids and parents and school staff. I hope everyone will join me on our next episode when I'll be talking to Sarah Burnett from Panera Food and Nyman Ranch Pork Company farmer Ron Mardison. Katie and Devon, thank you so much for being with me today. Please stay well.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Danny.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.